Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Conversations on Modern Slavery, Free the Slaves podcast series. Conversations on Modern Slavery explores the complexity of modern slavery across the world, looking at its drivers, its manifestations, and its consequences, featuring discussions about the latest research conducted by Free the Slaves, as well as dialogues with experts and frontline practitioners. This podcast seeks to amplify public awareness and galvanize action against modern slavery, providing insights into the root causes, disclosing narratives, and pioneering solutions. Conversations on Modern Slavery is a must-listen for everyone passionate about eradicating slavery. My name is Dr. Marta Furlan. I am Free the Slaves Senior Program Manager for Research, and I have the pleasure of hosting today's episode. In this episode with me today are two brilliant and talented survivor leaders, Shivan Pavin Alungnat and Wanja Kimani. In this episode, we will talk about a research project that Free the Slaves carried out with its partner, HAART Kenya. The title of the project is Survivors and Organizations Working Together Against Human Trafficking: Insights from East and Central Africa. Now, before we dive into this fascinating research, Shivana and Wanja, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners so that they can get to know you and the amazing work that you've been doing in the anti-trafficking movement?
Sure, thank you, Dr. Marta. My name is Wanja Kimani. Patricia is my baptismal name, so a lot of people also call me Patricia. I am a survivor leader, a researcher, an author of the book titled Greener Pastures in the Desert, which is a memoir of my experience in Saudi Arabia as a victim of human trafficking and modern slavery. I also do a lot of work with regards to international relations as an independent counter-trafficking and immigration consultant. I advise people on safe migration procedures abroad and verifying documents just to ensure that they don't fall into human trafficking. So yeah, my whole career is based upon eradicating human trafficking, or at least minimizing the risks involved when people are traveling abroad. So yeah, I know it's hard to fight human trafficking overnight, so I just do the little I can do to mitigate the risks of people falling into human trafficking, modern slavery, and similar practices. As a researcher, I did my first research with Free the Slaves and HAART Kenya, which is why I think we are here today. So it will be a pleasure to talk more about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanja. It's always such a pleasure to hear about the great work that you've been doing. And Shivana, please, the floor is yours to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marta. My name is Shivan Pavin Alungnat. I am a Ugandan that stays and works in Kenya after my lived experience in Dubai. I am a survivor leader, advocate, and a researcher in the counter-trafficking movement, but also in the queer movement. Much of my work is around bridging intersectionality between the human trafficking movement and the queer movement in terms of inclusion, and even just looking at the research that we did around survivor engagement. What does inclusion look like? And when it comes to engaging survivors of human trafficking. I am also the founder of African Aliyah, an organization that facilitates support, aftercare, and rescues for LBQ women and GNC persons. I am also an artist, a recording and performing artist that uses different mediums of art for advocacy. It could be within fighting human trafficking or the counter-trafficking movement, or even advocating for LBQ rights, that is in Uganda and Kenya or East Africa generally. I'm glad to be on this podcast, and I can't wait to share my experience throughout the research and after. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shivan. Here to hear about the contribution that you've been making to the anti-trafficking movement. So let's get started into the research discussion. So as I was saying at the beginning, we just published Free the Slaves and HAART, this research project, survivors and the organizations working against human trafficking, that focuses on East Africa and Central Africa. Now, you were involved actively and constantly throughout the research. So Could you tell us more about the research? What is that? What have you been doing as part of this research project? Which activities you were part of? Let's say, Shivan, would you like to start off?
Okay, I could start just briefing about the research that we did around survivor engagement beyond short services, or like I stand to be corrected by my colleagues in case I miss out any information or if anything needs to be added. But the research was mainly focused on finding out what survivor engagement looks like beyond service provision. Like what happens after a survivor has received the short-term services, the rescue and aftercare. Is there any other way that survivors are being engaged in terms of employment, capacity building, and all these other things that are beyond just service provision? What we did as research assistants on the research was we created the questionnaire by ourselves. It wasn't done by the main researchers. Free the Slaves and the partner, which was HAART Kenya, came up with a number of survivor leaders who work around research. And we started by creating the questionnaire that were to use during the research. But before we even got to that, we're taken through a research training, the methodology that we're supposed to use, getting us ready, what are the do's and don'ts of the research. And since we are working also with other survivors in the sector, what are some of the questions and all that? What approaches do we use? Languaging. The training shaped us in a professional way, while also looking at our experiences in a way that the questions that we're bringing were professional, however, not professional in a formal way that if it's a question that is asked directly to a survivor, it would either re-traumatize them or trigger. So we did the questionnaire, went over it over and over again until we were all comfortable and put ourselves in those shoes whereby if we're the ones who are participants of the research, how would we feel about all those questions and how would we answer them? Once we got done with that process, we then proceeded to the field where we were the interviewers of the research. We met other survivor leaders and survivors that don't necessarily prefer to be identified as survivor leaders. We met with them and we conducted the research. So the entire process was involving us as survivor leaders, which I felt really, really impressed and amazed to be part of, because in most cases, the best they can do or the best the sector does is that they'll bring you maybe to do the questionnaire and then after that you disappear. Or they will do their own questionnaire and then they just bring you to be the interviewer. But the entire process was so inclusive and patient with us, based on the fact that it was our very first research project that was to be reported and published, which was quite powerful to all the other survivor leaders that participated in it. But yeah, we conducted the research and after that, we transcribed it. That was also another part that was quite amazing. I thought I was the lazy writer. As a creative, it's way easy for us to do our own advocacy and, quick writing that is our own creative. But this time it was real writing, and it was so interesting to write, even to be in the process of the transcription and all that. After that, the main researchers deleted what we needed to delete from our side for safety. And yeah, we're also part of the report writing. We're involved in the entire process until the research was published officially. And that was my experience. I think that's just the briefing of the entire research from scratch to when it was published.
Thank you so much, Shivan, for guiding us through this fascinating process of research engagement. And Wanja, is there anything that you would like to add? And also following up on what Shivan was sharing with us, this research focuses on understanding survivor engagement beyond the provision of services. So I'm very interested in hearing from you, Wanja, why there was a need for this kind of research. What need were you trying to fill when you decided to look beyond service provision?
Thank you, Shivana, for addressing all those areas, because it would have been harder for me to even tackle each and every aspect of the research. I would like to first appreciate the organizations Free the Slaves and HAART Kenya for giving us the platform to learn that much. And other than learning, just being involved from the conception of the research all the way to the final step, and just looking forward to the launching in a couple of days. It's been so fulfilling, and it's been a privilege that we don't take for granted. So yeah, we were involved from the very beginning, from the crafting of the questionnaires all the way to writing the report, to presenting the findings on different forums. And yeah, it was a good experience. But I would like to say that this research was necessary, because every time we have presented it or we have mentioned it even briefly, we find that people from other organizations find it fascinating, like they've never thought about it that way, because most organizations just stick to what was their core mandate during the forming of the organization. But now they don't consider that the survivors might be needing more than just being given services. They might need some sort of empowerment that can only be given by the organization. So the survivor engagement is really necessary, because from what we found out during the research, a lot of organizations just stop at the service provision, but there are so many survivors. From what we heard during the interviews, there are so many survivors that would like to be employed in these organizations, maybe given some attachments or internships or things of that sort. So having this done as a research and creating some sort of framework for other organizations to emulate will ensure that survivors can get more than just the services, because services can get depleted. But when you give the survivor an opportunity to exercise their skills or their knowledge, and also something as little as it may be, that empowerment is like a stepping stone for them to keep growing career-wise, keep growing mentally, psychologically, a framework for other organizations to adopt more sustainable ways of helping survivors. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, Wanja. So I would like to hear now, what did you like most about taking part in this research, and what did you find most useful in terms of participating in a research project with these two organizations, and also how the process of participating in the research compared to what were your initial expectations? I think this would be very important, both for Free the Slaves and HAART, but also for any other organization that wants to start a research project with the active and constant participation of survivors, understand what was done well and what could be done even better next time. Shivan, would you like to go?
Hi, Dr. Marta. Could you please rephrase the question again?
Yes, sure. I wanted to hear from you and Wanja. What did you like most about participating in the research project? What did you find the most useful as well? And how the participation compares to what were your initial expectations? Because I think this can be very helpful to know, both for Free the Slaves and HAART, and for other organizations in the anti-trafficking space that might want to engage survivors in research in the near future.
Looking at my very first expectations that I got or listed down immediately, Jacqueline reached out to me. And also the fact that by then I was working as an independent survivor, I was not necessarily affiliated to any organization, was way beyond my expectation. Because in most cases, for a survivor leader to be engaged, they have to be affiliated to a certain organization. But yeah, it was... for me, looking at it from an aspect of being also a queer advocate and survivor, looking at it also from an aspect that by that time I was an independent consultant in the sector, and looking at it from an aspect that by then I was displaced, because I think at some point, most of the projects that happen around Kenya are mainly for Kenyans. You get it. It's very hard to find such projects that will involve, okay, we also have Ugandans who are staying in Kenya and all that stuff. If it's a Kenyan project, it's going to be strictly Kenyan. But there's always not been a consideration of, once a survivor leader is displaced, how do we create paths for this person to also be involved? So that was the first kick and take off a comparison of my expectation. I didn't expect to be included in that space at all, even putting me in that project. So that was a kudos for me for FTS. And then the other thing that I did not expect, I think I even mentioned it earlier, where in most cases when we are engaged in research projects, it's either you're just participants or you're brought in a certain level of the research to either help with the questionnaire. But in most cases, I've not seen that inclusion where it's actually survivors or survivor leaders coming up with the questionnaire. In most cases, researchers or research projects intend to just come up with their questions that they want answers to, not considering that if you look at what you're researching on and involve lived experiences, it's way easier to get the actual questions that will still give you the information you're looking for, but not with the way you wanted it to happen. So yeah, that was very, very, very impressive, and it completely kicked off the expectations that I also had. The other question was, could you please?
Yes. What did you like and what did you find most useful?
I think the most useful thing and important, and one of the things that I'm very passionate about in this sector is intersectionality and inclusion. Like I mentioned earlier, the displacement, the queerness, and my nationality did not stop me from participating in the project, which I think if it's something that other organizations in the sector could adopt, it would be amazing, because I believe we have very, very, very many queer survivor leaders or even just survivors that are out there, and they're not in these spaces because even right from their rescues and aftercare, there was all this exclusion involved and all that. So the moment someone after service provision and anyone else would just go into, a corner and disappear from the movement, because you already saw a lot of loops during your rescue and even just the aftercare that you received. So I think that is very, very important. Inclusion and intersectionality was an amazing thing that all researchers in this sector need to adapt. That was a big hand raise for me. The other thing is that this time round, the research was as open to many other, how do I say it? It was more of a regional thing, which I think is very important if we're going to look at it from lived experiences all over Africa. It is very important to get different countries. I was so happy to see siblings from Cameroon, happy to see siblings from Congo, all involved in the project. Because in most cases, I don't know, I think it probably comes from a point of shortage in resources. But I think that is also nice next time we're looking at research and how wide we can extend the span to reach other countries, whereby you'll get an experience from Uganda. The experience from Uganda alone might not be the same as from Kenya, because you're talking to people who are from different backgrounds and all that. Someone from Congo will have a very, very complete different experience. And I think that is very important, especially when it comes to research, not just concentrate on one specific country or a few countries, but rather looking at it from an aspect of our region. So yeah, pass it on to Wanja.
Yeah, it's been a while since we met. I think this research was a good opportunity for us also to get to meet, and I'm glad I met you, Shivan. So this research exceeded my expectations, first of all, because I had no expectations whatsoever. When I was called for the research, it was so impromptu. I was just minding my business in the house, and then I got a call from one of the admins at HAART Kenya, and she asked me if I was available that day. And whenever I hear it's something to do with either of the organizations, I'd rather drop everything else I was doing as long as it was not productive. So I was just resting in the house. So when she asked if I was available, I just said yes. Yes, I just left the house. I went and I got there. I was told it's about a research project that the two organizations were working on, and they felt that my contribution and my willingness to learn and the willingness to be available would come in handy for the research. So yeah, that's where my journey began with the research. And on those first few days, we learned about how to conduct the interviews. And yeah, even things to do with the questionnaires. And then eventually we drafted the questionnaires and we discussed them. And as Shivan has said earlier on, there is some language we can use that is actually professional, but it's not ethical, like it might re-traumatize the survivor. So yes, we learned about the ethical communication during the research, and that is one thing that I did not know before. So yes, there are some things we can learn in school, in university, but as far as the movement goes, we really need to also be taught within the context of the movement, just to ensure that we remain ethical and professional at the same time. So other than the learning, there is some reimbursement of transport that we got that played a key role in helping me re-establish my life again, because my son had just come out of surgery, and it was just a very dark part of my life. But me being engaged in the research was not only a way to get an avenue to just get away from the daily stress, but also to just know that I am now being engaged as a professional, so I am no longer jobless as such. Like, yes, when you're staying in the house, you don't have an expectation that the following day you'll be working somewhere, and all of a sudden it just turns around, So I just came from being unemployed to being a researcher, like within the snap of a finger. So when I went to the research, I always looked forward to just learning more and obviously expecting something at the end of the day. So that's how my life started to brighten up a bit. And when we were signing the contracts, I saw that we were actually going to be paid to interview people. And that was another big plus. That was like, I had no expectation of being paid anything. So I just knew that this is one of those voluntary engagements that we find ourselves going for when we want to maybe participate in activities, in the organization's activities. So when I heard that we were actually being paid to do the interviews, I knew that this was for real. I am a researcher, and it's not just by name, I'm actually getting paid as a researcher. So that was really motivating. It really brightened up my days, and yeah, I said I would give it my best, follow the instructions, remain ethical. Things like being ethical are not about just following the rules in the book. It's who you become. You just become that, not just by following the rules, but by living up to what is expected of you, both as a survivor leader and as a researcher. Yeah, so it became part of me, and it has become so natural. Even now, there is a way I can phrase my language when speaking with fellow survivors that I could not do before I was engaged in the research. So I can say that the being engaged in the research also shaped my character as far as communication and conducting myself among other survivors goes. So eventually, I was invited for the Africa Regional Freedom from Slavery Forum, and that was a pleasant surprise. So everything was sponsored. It's a privilege I don't take for granted. So yes, I was invited for that Freedom from Slavery Forum Africa region. And upon attending the conference, I was not just an attendee. I went there as a panelist, and I also presented some preliminary findings from the research. And that is a privilege I can not forget anytime soon, not in this life and not in the next. So when I went there, like, there are some pictures of me that were taken, and whenever I share them, people just see me as a professional. People did not look at me the same way from that time. And after that, Brenda and I got the opportunity to do the coding, the qualitative analysis. Or the qualitative analysis we had already done before. So the quantitative analysis, we had to do the coding for the numerical data that was collected. And Brenda and I really enjoyed it. It was so hectic. It was a lengthy process, but anything just to live up to the name of a researcher. It was a full-fledged researcher title. So we took it and we did our best. Then after that, we got invited for the global forum that took place in the Dominican Republic. I'm happy that Shivan and I made it, and we had a really great time to just also reason like researchers when other people were presenting their different research projects. We also had something to say. We had solid questions to ask that were relevant to the research. So we came off as professionals, not just survivors. And a lot of people changed their mindsets and their perspective towards survivors, because usually survivors were just considered attendees who are not supposed to speak, who are traumatized, who cannot give any input. I say this because I had it and I saw it in some of the findings. There's some places that survivors could not speak or could not air their opinion. So Shivan and I getting to attend the forum in the Dominican Republic and giving professional input, even as far as research goes, was a huge plus. And we could not have, or at least I could not have done that if it were not for this particular research that Free the Slaves at HAART Kenya engaged me in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wanja. And actually, if I may build on something that you were saying, and perhaps we can expand a bit on it with Shivan as well. I would like to hear more about how do you think that participating in this research project has been helping your professional growth as a survivor leaders within the movement, and how do you think that participating in this project will support you to reach your goals? Maybe Wanja, you would like to go first, and then Shivan can share with us as well.
Yeah, I think just being called a researcher and maybe having credentials to prove that I'm actually a researcher, appearing in a publication, and even just having the honors to stand in front of people and speak about it during the launch, that has been and will still be a huge advantage to me, because when I include that in my resume, it might give me an upper hand. It can give me an upper hand as far as maybe social work, or just, let's say, if we stick to the movement, if there is an organization that needs researchers, having that added to my resume gives me the advantage, because sometimes, yes, we might be wanting to be engaged as survivors, but sometimes that extra merit is what breaks the tie between me and somebody else. So I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate that I can add that to my resume. So yes, professionally, it has helped me in that way. And at the same time, just being able to attend these forums and present the research findings as raw as they were, it has been a great advantage to me, because now, other than just being a conference attendee or a forum attendee, I can say I went there as a researcher to present the preliminary findings. And even being engaged in the coding, it shows that I do have a keen eye as far as numerical data is involved, or transferring or changing the format of one document into another. So including that in my resume shows that I am experienced even in terms of technology, in terms of documentation and things like that. And I'm really looking forward to the launch so that I can now say that my name appears somewhere. Yeah, it's something I'm looking forward to. I don't even have the right words to express how excited I am that it's finally being launched after two beautiful years of waiting to see the end product of what we worked on.
Thank you so much, Wanja, for sharing your enthusiasm. And what about you, Shivan? How do you think that the research has been contributing to your professional growth and supporting you to reach your goals?
Thank you so much, Dr. Marta. Wanja, I want to agree with you 100%. In terms of experience, I 100% agree with you. We were able to get experience. I think all of us who participated in the research, one way or the other, whichever level you are, by the time we're done with the project, we all had more skills that we did not have. I had done a few research projects here and there, However, like Wanja said, working with Free the Slaves or being a consultant with Free the Slaves was a huge growth in my CV that has also enabled me get other consultancies in the sector. I've currently done a few consulting projects with the Survivor Alliance, and I was recently part of the action plan research that was carried out by Survivor Alliance. The action plan was basically research and planning an action plan for the next decades of survivor leaders, or action plan in survivor employment in the next decade, which was quite interesting because most of the skills that I used and the experience that I used during that project was based on the skills that we got from the training that we did with Free the Slaves, which was very important. I think also part of the things that I forgot to mention around the importance of this research was, for me, I felt like through the slave experience of the research itself before even it was launched and all that, because the fact that in most cases survivor engagement is limited due to the fact that survivors lack capacity. That is some of the findings that we even found was because the reason why survivors are not in the movement so much or in the sector as leaders or professionally because they lack the capacity, which is true. But what are you doing to improve that? Which I think Free the Slave lived as an example. When they brought us on board, they didn't ask who has done research before or who has the skills or not. It was seeing us as people who needed skills. We needed to be in the project, and they were looking at us as people who needed to have information from scratch and what needs to be done in this specific sector, or in an aspect of looking at it that we are ourselves, we are survivor leaders, and we're also going to work around survivor leaders and other survivors, was quite a spark for me. I forgot to mention that earlier. However, coming back to my point, I was part of the action plan that was launched recently by Survivor Alliance. The action plan was to come up with 4 key themes whereby we discuss action plans for survivors leading the global anti-trafficking movement, survivors in decision-making positions, survivors providing direct services, survivors leading the production of knowledge, which is very important because all my participation in this project came from the experience that we had with the survivor engagement research with Free the Slaves. If you look at all the skills and experience that I put into this project, most especially when it came to survivors leading the production of knowledge, right now, I believe Wanja and Brenda can agree with me that we could train other survivors to actually be researchers or how to conduct trainings or whatever level of research. We can share that knowledge with our communities, which I have done personally with our members in Africa and Aliyah, even just in terms of when we're identifying a victim, what are the questions you ask a victim, you get. All that experience came from us being part of that project, and all the knowledge that I'm applying in my work now was based on that project, which is amazing. I am also recently or currently working on another research project of employment. Forgive my a lot of I'm trying to look. English can be a problem all the time for some of us who are Ugandans. I make that disclaimer in every meeting that I go to. That is me trying to regather all my English back in system. But anyway, I'm currently working on an employment pathway project with the Survivor Alliance where we're trying to find out what, I'll not share so much details because it's an ongoing project, but we're trying to find out what are the pathway systems that are in place right now in terms of employment around the sector, when it comes to survivor leaders or survivors. What are the things that need to be put in place if they are not there, and finding out all these other. I'm excited about it and I can't wait for that to be done. But also, if you look at how I am participating in the projects, I'm using all the skills that we got from that, and they are all paid consultancies. So it's not just growth in terms of, growing our CVs, because in most cases, what has been happening in the sector is re-exploitation, which is not nice. And some of the things even the survivor engagement research project was about was to find out those things. How many people are paid? If someone is volunteering, is it a paid voluntary contract, or someone is just working from Monday to Monday and Monday to Monday without no pay? If they are staff members, do they have contracts and all these things? I think it was very important because that is what the sector is for, to fight against exploitation. So if we're going to fight exploitation and still be the same sector that exploits people, it doesn't seem right. So I think that was very, very important. It's something that I captured and I'm using right now, even as a new leader who just founded an organization. I earlier mentioned I'm a founder of African Aliyah. All the things that were implemented or put in position during the project that we did with FTS, the exact, or even I bettered that information and skill in my own alignment as a queer person, as a person that works with queers who are also survivors. What are all these things that I need to put in place? So the knowledge and skills and experience that we got from the project was not just a financial one. It came financially. It grew our CVs in terms of a financial. Right now, if I apply for any research consultancies, I can give proof that I've done quite a few research projects that are actually paid. So meaning if you want to involve me, you're not just going to involve me because, you think I have the experience and I also want to be, proactive in the movement and I will just come and work on it. Yes, there's also a point of negotiation during the training that we had. So there was a lot of things that we all went back home besides the bag of money, which was an excitement to all of us because I think it came in a time where we were just kicking and shedding off from COVID and all that. We were all struggling one way or the other, based on the fact that some of us are parents, we had fees to pay and all these other things, which also outlines, yes, sometimes survivors want to be proactive in the sector, but how about all these other responsibilities and the other life that they have to deal with on a daily? And now when you look at it at a point of not having capacity, how do we, create capacity, work with these backgrounds in a way that, yes, their daily life is not going to be affected, but still they are going to, participate in trainings and all that stuff. Because even during the training, our transport was paid, which I think is very important. The money aspect might sound as a point we are emphasizing on so much, but I think it's very, very important because that's what is also limiting us survivors from taking the so-called personal initiatives, which is important. I think everyone wants to grow. However, the responsibilities that people have to deal with on a daily, the relapses, the triggers, and all these things, sometimes the best you can afford for a day, even just with just mental states, all you can afford for a day is probably a lunch or a dinner plate for you and your kids, and you'll not be able to have data to attend meetings and all these things. And sometimes when projects are being structured, this is forgotten. Yes, people want to grow. I don't think there's anyone who wants to fail in life, most especially if you've gone through a lived experience of modern day slavery or any other form of human trafficking. Everyone wants to grow because at that point you're dealing with a lot of stigma, you're dealing with a lot of I want to rise back, you're dealing with, but all these other things are things that pull people down to not be proactive in the movement. So I think Free the Slaves did a very wonderful job from understanding that from the point of, supporting things like data for the training, even considering that we need to be trained. That was and we even got certificates that we now use to even get other jobs and consultancies. Yeah, so I think it's very, very important. And a recommendation from part of the team that worked on the research, it's very, very important that we capture that, considering what it means to, create spaces to, build capacity, to engage. What does it look like from a raw level of understanding? People come from different backgrounds and all other things and factors that might fool them not to be as proactive as they would have been.
Thank you so much, Shivan. It's really great to hear all the many different projects in which you have been actively involved. And I'm so happy to hear about that. Now, as we conclude our podcast episode, is there any additional thought or comment that Shivan and Wanja you would like to share with our listeners that I didn't touch upon?
Yeah, sure. A very short one. As always, I think I already said this, and I'm very soon I'm going to be being called the girl of inclusion and intersectionality. Have you seen her? Is she in this meeting? Yeah, I think the only thing I will leave our listeners with is that whatever work that we do in this sector and in the movement, whichever way and whichever forms we are doing our work, please, 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 let's embrace inclusion and intersectionality. I think it's very, very important for us to try to fight exploitation in every level. If we look at it from that angle, it will be way easier for us to, even around just researchers and other sectors, not just researchers, but mainly researchers, let's start looking at things from an angle of inclusion and intersectionality at all angles. It's way easier for us to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivan. Wanja, is there anything else that you would like to add before we conclude?
Not much, because the reason why I like being in the same spaces as Shivan is because she sees very far and she sees very wide. So she has covered every aspect that I would have wanted to tackle, but thank goodness she's here and she has addressed it. What I would say is that I hope that the findings of this research, the recommendations, will actually be implemented so that what we have done will not remain just on paper or end at discussions, but it is something that all organizations will embrace, even to the benefit of both the organization and the survivors, because growth comes when we all grow and freedom comes if we are all free. So I think as long as all organizations can embrace this and make it part of their framework, part of their manifesto, part of any guiding principles that they have, I think we will move a lot of steps forward as far as fighting human trafficking goes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Wanja and Shivan, for being the guests of this podcast episode, and thank you to all of our listeners for staying with us throughout this episode. And I remind to all of you that you can follow Free the Slaves updates, including our survivor engagement, on our website, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and of course on Spotify for our podcast. Thank you very much.